If I got the chance to go out, I went. My biggest vice is probably, at least back then and to an extent now, is if you said party, I said where, and I try to get to it.
So today is February 5th, 2021. Who are we speaking with?
Mark B. My name is actually Mark Blagrove. If you even know my name, if you even know it was Mark B, usually on this scene it's been that, hey, that dude.
Where were you born and where do you live now?
I was born and raised in New York City. Originally, well, I was born in Lenox Hill Hospital. Lived in Brooklyn at points, lived in Queens most of my life, love it out here, and have lived in Manhattan, but I'm mostly a Queens person.
Growing up as a child,
yeah,
what kind of music did you hear around the house?
Oh man, my parents, especially my dad, he was a hardcore Christian. And when I say hardcore, I mean the whole fall over and speak in tongues on command if you had to. Good guy, but my parents were not into music. They just weren't. I spent a lot of my time listening to WABC. I don't know, at the time, they had a large share of the audience. So it's always funny when I meet people of a certain age, if they try to front on me like, oh, you know, they don't know who Led Zeppelin is, or they, you know, never heard the Doors or stuff like that. Or, you know, I'm like, you listen to Ron Lundy with me. So, yeah, so don't pretend. So I grew up listening to WABC. And then as I got older, listened to more RL. Usually I was listening to WWRL in the car with, you know, other adults that I knew. And then eventually, you know, as FM grew and grew, I started listening to WBLS and Frankie Crocker.
What is WBLS?
The world's best looking sound. Too bad I can't say it like the giant, you know, that whole W, you know, that whole echo. But for me, WBLS was everything. It's everything that the music industry is lacking right now, just in my opinion, and everything that I always wanted to experience in music, because they played everything. They had an extensive playlist, and they played it all. They played the long versions. And in between time, you had Frankie Crocker, who's, you know, the one I always think about, and he had great stories. He talked to people. He talked to people about things, and I was always amazed to hear him. So he was a big part of my life, especially when 8 o'clock came around, because when you heard Frankie Crocker play Moody's Mood, my ass had better be home. You know, my mom was like, 8 o'clock, that's it. So by the time Moody's Mood went off, I had to be in the house. So a lot of what I love about music was WBLS, but I also listened to, you know, a few other stations. 99X was big for me. As I got older, I started listening to more of the hip hop on Hot 97. Definitely listen to WLIR, which is more localized out in Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk County. They were all new wave music, which I love as well. So, you know, I had very much eclectic tastes, and between all of those sources, my tastes were covered.
So we talked about radio. Television was part of the zeitgeist as well. Mm-hmm. Talk about Soul Train and its cultural relevance, if at all.
Soul Train. I watched both Soul Train and Bandstand, so I'm not gonna front. I was watching them both. Soul Train, though, you know, you got to see what the older cats were doing, you know, because I was still kind of a shorty, but you know, you got to watch people doing, you know, all sorts of dances on Soul Train. You get out there afterwards and try to replicate some of those, or you know, just try to do what you saw. So Soul Train was a big part of my Saturday mornings. And of course, you know, I'm in the house, you have to clean anyhow. So I'm listening to Soul Train and cleaning my room, which was pretty much mandatory.
And then talk to us about the transition to going out to clubs. You remember the first nightclub you went to?
Whoa, the first nightclub I went to would have to be the Fantasia nightclub. This was in Queens. It was basically to hear all of the hip hop cats, and we didn't call them hip hop at that time, but it was to hear all those crews that were rolling through there, like, you know, Grandmaster Flash, like Cypher Sounds, Disco Twins, I can't remember, King Charles with his with all his earthquakes. You know, you go out there for that. So that was my first experience with clubbing. I was only around 16 at that point. I'd been out, you know, in the parks and all that before, but my first nightclub going to was Fantasia. Dangerous space. I don't live far from where that space is currently, but it was a dangerous spot, like especially afterwards, because, you know, don't let a bunch of guys with quarter fields roll up you, or that's basically your ass if you were rolling alone. And I went out alone a lot because, you know, I didn't have my dad in the house to stop me from going anywhere. And so if I got the chance to go out, I went. My biggest vice is probably, at least back then and to an extent now, is if you said party, I said where, and I try to get to it.
I love it. And then talk to us about the transition from there to house music.
Wow. From there to house, there's such a huge transition for me, because in the interim, there's a big jump between that point in my life, 15, 16 years old, and my first experience in a nightclub, which was at a house kind of club. We didn't even call it a house then, but there was a big transition because I was 18, 19 right around then. And in between time, most of my time was spent in the club of the streets. I used to go to the house parties and the block parties. I lived for that stuff. So I was spending a lot of time there. And then because I was doing so much spending so much of my time there, I was also building up a sound system. Back then, I think I ordered a copy of the EAW's Sound Bible because we would used to try to build speakers, because I was a part of a crew around the way, and you know, we saw what the older guys were doing and we tried to emulate them. So, you know, I started building up turntables, speakers, and all that, mostly speakers. And you know, as I went along, I always started buying music because I just, you know, I liked what I was hearing. Although amusingly enough, the first record that I ever bought was a 45, the Bay City Rollers Saturday Night. That was
really,
the first record I ever bought. I bought like 8 tracks before that, you know, Columbia House, 12 for a nickel or some nonsense like that. But the first actual piece of wax that I ever bought was the Bay City Rollers. Go figure. Wow. But in between hip hop around the way and going to nightclubs, I'd gone to a lot of the smaller spots, the neighborhood spots where I learned and used to watch all the time. But my first exposure to an actual nightclub in Manhattan was at, I believe it was Mellons. It was on 15th Street and 2nd Avenue or something like that. I used to go to Stuyvesant, so it was right around the block from Stuyvesant. So that was my first exposure, and I was pretty mesmerized.
Describe Mellons. What did they look like inside? What were people wearing? Was it a dress-up club? Was it a dancing club? Was it
not a
club?
Yeah, it was not a dress-up club. Okay. I can't even remember the details of the interior, but I just remember I went there with a couple of older guys that I knew from the neighborhood. They're like, "Oh, Mark, you want to come out?" So they take me to Mellons. And I remember the first night I was there, I was dressed up because that's what you did as a kid. And I get there and nobody's really dressed up. They're just like living life and they're dancing. and the women were incredible. So that's my other advice. If you tell me a story about a club and you said, and then you'll meet women, I'm like, yeah, let's go. So Mellons was my first experience at a Manhattan club, but I went to the other one I remember going to quite vividly was Jelly Bean's spot, and why can't I remember the name of it now?
Funhouse?
Yeah, Clubhouse. Funhouse, yes. And I enjoyed the hell out of that spot. So that's when I really started going out in Manhattan and listening to all kinds of music. But I wasn't just going there. I'd be over at CBGBs sometimes. I'd be at Bentlys sometimes. That was one of the dress-up clubs. Silver Shadow, another dress-up club. Trying to sneak my way into spots like Regines if I could. Those were all dress-up clubs. But I'm coming from watching Soul Train all the time. So I'm like, and I'm a tall string bean. So I was tall enough to look like maybe I should be in here, even though I shouldn't. But I was getting into some of them and I was enjoying myself immensely. So for a kid like myself who grew up in a highly religious household, to get out and get into these scenes and just party was like ultimate freedom.
Wow. Describe the moment when you fell in love with house music.
When I fell in love with house music, I don't know if I've ever fallen in love with house music because I don't really know what house music is to this day. I know that there's Chicago style music. I know that there's English style music. I know that stuff was coming out of Belgium, Italy, but I never really termed it house because in going out, my first experience is like going to the garage, and that's really where I'll start. If we want to delineate something as a house music phase, I'll go there because you can say that you had the proto house coming out of that spot, with Boy Jarvis and some of his productions and things like that. However, for me, that kind of experience going to the garage was where it all started to kind of take shape for me as to what I wanted to how I wanted to party and the kind of people I wanted to party with and the overall experience that I wanted to deliver. And I synthesized in some of the things that I did later, I synthesized that experience with the experience of growing up also in a Caribbean community where you had plenty of music, you had plenty of booze, you had plenty of food, and you kind of were just giving it all out and having a great time with people. And so I like that informality of a spot like the Paradise Garage. So that was my first foot dive into this, as it were. And the other part of it, and that's why I always say it's difficult for me to delineate, when I was in that spot and others, they were playing everything. I could hear, Peter Gabriel. I could hear the Peach Boys. I could hear the Tramps. And as things rolled along, I could hear stuff coming out of Chicago. I could hear rock. I could hear everything because people were searching for that good groove. They weren't really searching for a label. It wasn't like, oh, this is how it's played. No, it was like, this is a great track. I'm playing it. So like even like a track, I forgot if I heard it at the garage or it was somewhere else, 2 Tickets to Paradise by Eddie Money. I always loved how they ran that song because the percussion on it is so compelling that I'd always have a great time. So I can't say that I have a house experience. I can't say that I know, oh, this day it flipped into house. I can say that I've always been a lover of dance music in all its iterations. I think that's a better way to put it. And at the garage, I started to understand more about dance music in its iterations and maybe in its presentation.
two-part question. How did you discover the garage, and what made the garage so special?
How did I discover a garage? It was, I think it was after the summer after my junior year. A kid that I went to school with, I was in high school. So I went to school in Manhattan. I went to Stuyvesant. So a kid that I knew, I hadn't seen him all summer because he lived in Brooklyn. I'm in Queens. I see him the next summer. And if he was 250 before the summer, when I saw him in September, he was 200. So it's like, yo, what happened to you? And he's like, yo, man, I went to this club all summer. It's called The Garage. It's downtown. It's nothing but, good looking women. They're half naked. And that's, I don't think I heard much else after that. Yeah, I'm like, party, women. And then he's talking about free fruit and all that. I'm like, I'm there. And that's when I started going on a regular. That was pretty much my first exposure.
Do you remember what year that was?
I want to say it was probably 1980, most likely 1980. But I just remember my first time going, some dude behind me was like screaming, laughing. And I thought he was laughing at me, because I'm still like, an L7, I'm completely square and in there, trying to hang. So I'm listening to this guy. I'm like, is this dude laughing at me? What the hell's going on? Then I realized later he was probably just on acid and having a great trip. But that was my first experience there. But another part of that experience there is I was noticing the sound system in the place. Because remember, I went to Stuyvesant, which means I'm a geek to begin with. And I had owned like a small, BS sound system. I'm in there and I'm listening to the sound and I'm like, holy cow, I didn't know speakers could do this. I didn't know music could do this. What's that? Why the tweeters out like that? All sorts of things going through my mind. And that had a huge influence just on how I started directing myself afterwards.
Describe the garage itself. The ramp, the vibe, the DJ booth, the fruit, the coat check. For someone that's never been there, describe the experience of walking on King Street, getting off this train on Varick. Just walk us through the garage journey.
Yeah, that journey for me, because I had no car, so I was taking a bus and train, and I lived at the far end of Queens, so that means I'm taking a bus and a train the whole way. After getting off the train, you're usually walking up to the club, and all of a sudden, all these guys are snoop, they try to hit you up with some sort of drugs. I'm usually passing on that. And then you get to the front, and the interesting thing is that I had a friend, because you had to go with a member. So I had a member bringing me over there. So the interesting part was watching the line. Sometimes I'd be online so long, line was long. So I'm going there. I usually had a book or something like that. I'm reading it online. Going up the ramp was always the anticipation part, because you can hear the music, music throbbing inside. You pay your dollars, and then, my first thing was off to the bathroom, because I wanted to change my clothes, put them in a bag, and then bring the bag to the coat check and get into the spot. Inside the space itself, my usual hangout was by the front speakers, because I'm trying to catch anybody walking in. Don't give anybody a chance to meet anyone else. It's like, how can you pass by all this? So I'm usually camped out there, but I'd also hang out on the stage after the show, and I would watch the movies, because they'd show incredible movies in there. I got to see a lot of things, a lot of movies that I may not have ordinarily seen. I think I saw Fellini's Satiricon in there, I believe. I can't be sure. But for me, that was an experience. And then, of course, you have the fresh fruit in the room. So, you didn't have to worry. I thought you got good value for money in what they were delivering. The sound system was amazing. I finally got to experience Bertha's inside of a club like that, because, mind you, I said I'd experienced the Disco Twins and those hip hop guys before that, and they actually had some of those kind of speakers as part of their sound system. So I had seen them, I knew what they were, but I never experienced them in that kind of room with like, I believe they had 6 of them or something like that. I don't remember. So that was an experience. And of course, a huge dance floor and all of these good looking women in there. You know, I keep bringing it back to the women, obviously, you know, so it was just good. So I would stay in there blowing my mind until about 8, 9 in the morning, where I'd usually go home. So that means in the summer, I had a great time. In the winter, I felt like a vampire because I didn't see much the sun in the evening. So getting back to talking about, you know, the garage, a great club, great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Massive sound system, great people, just an overall good vibe. I was sorry to see it end, but you know, all things end. And at that time in New York, you got to remember, you had a lot of other places to go to as well. So the garage wasn't my only spot. I go to the loft sometimes. I wasn't a big loft head, but I'd go there on occasion. But I also went to Zanzibar quite often. And
tell folks, what is Zanzibar?
Oh, Zanzibar, what was that? The old Lincoln Motel over in Newark. And I believe that was another Richard Long design system with Tony Humphreys, who in my mind is another one of those great DJs. I used to go to see him on Saturdays because I was a Friday member at the garage. And Saturdays I'd head out to Zanzibar many weeks, not all weeks, because you know that was a haul from where I was, but a great room. The Jersey crowd was quite different from the people that were partying in Manhattan, but in a lot of ways they were similar. They, you know, just like to have fun, young people having a great time and doing what they do. So, you know, back then that was a golden age. And then for me during the week, I would be going to other places, like sometimes the Palladium. A lot of times I'd go to Spit and Uncle Sam's, which were new wave clubs out in Long Island. Both Spit and Uncle Sam's, I believe they were the same place. Spit one night, Uncle Sam's the next. But they also had another spot called 007. So I would go out there because, you know, they had, it was cheap to get in. They had dollar shots and 50-cent beers, something like that, something ridiculous. So I'm in there having a great time. And so that was a big part of my experience. And then also I was in school too. So, you know, it was a way for me to just blow off steam during the week.
What is Wild Pitch?
Wild Pitch, wow. Wild Pitch, you know, something that was a party started by Greg Day. And the original part, I didn't realize this until maybe 2 years ago. I was part of the first Wild Pitch party. You know, I brought my sound system out for that and combined it with other things, but as part of the first one, had no idea up until 2 years ago when somebody told me. I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know that was the first one. But it was a movable feast, as it were. It was a party that Greg Day, who, you know, I view as a mentor, just as knew how to do things independently in this scene. He put those together, and they were monster events. He had the spots that we had them were varied from Brooklyn to from Brooklyn, I should say, to Manhattan. They were in venues of various sizes. Some were, you know, more seedy than others, but they were always a good time. The original event, I believe, was revolved around a promotion with Wild Pitch Records, which was a label. However, we just pretty much grabbed up the name and ran with it. So we were doing these guerrilla parties all over town. And the interesting thing is you had to think fast on your feet, because usually our door was going to pay the staff, pay the DJs, pay security, and buy flyers, and then give everybody some mad money to live on through the week. But it was good, and it was memorable. And a lot of individuals that are on the scene today, from what I see, got their start when they were in attendance at our events. We did some pretty crazy things at them, but the one thing that I loved is that we operated as a crew. Everybody had everybody's back. Everybody eats, everybody fights. That's the only way you can have a crew. And the other part of it is that you can't fall into that whole drum major mentality, because somebody has to sweep the floors, somebody has to give out the flyers, somebody has to be a DJ. Now, we knew multiple DJs, but not everybody was going to get down, because you just can't. You'd have to have the people who are best at it do their job. And then, if you had other rooms, because one of the things that we did do quite often were do events where you had multiple rooms. So you'd have a main room, you'd have a secondary room, which was hip hop, and then you might have a third room where, you could play anything you want, other music, as I like to say. So someone like me would play that third room because, frankly, I'm not the main room jock, never have been, never really cared to be, if you want to know the truth. I was always in this for the action. But I have a nice collection and I can spin it if called upon. So that's what we would do. So my Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays were always exciting because we were always running around getting ourselves ready for that event, buying food. You'd have people like myself, Greg, Little Ray, Hector Cruz, Meek, Steve, Nancy, a whole crew of us that would get together to put these on. And then the promoters that we would bring in would build it out. So there were a few promoters that may have been smaller at that time who grew in stature through their association with us and were able to break off and do great things themselves. So that was a thrilling part of Wild Pitch to me. And then lastly, the acts. We used to put on entertainment on a lot of different weeks. So the one that always sticks out in my mind is we did Clubland. That song, Hold On Tighter to Love.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we did them. And that was like a favorite event of ours. But we did quite a few people. Warriors Dance performed for us one night. Did Shantae Savage perform? I don't remember. But there were quite a few performers who came through, and quite a few DJs came through and played. Louis Vega, Dave Morales. Nick Jones, who I think is one of the best DJs out there. Timmy Richardson, he likes to call himself TOT, and he was partners in this as well. He came in and I think he grew in experience and grew in stature from playing at those events. So it was really a groundbreaking type of thing, and it was all of us chipping in to do something.
I want to dig a little deeper there. What happened? Did you guys ever get raided by the police, or how did you avoid that? Because these were guerrilla parties.
Yeah, we never got raided by the police.
Wow.
We never, yeah. Most people came and were chill. There wasn't about no fights or nothing like that. People, were coming to get down. I don't remember the fire department may have shown up once, but I don't remember ever getting raided by the police. So I think that's a testament to our professionalism, if you want to call it that, or our organization, which I laughingly call it that. But I think it's a testament to the way we ran things. We were tight-knit, and we rolled with people who had, they wanted to do more.
How did you find the venues? Because those are rolling venues, right? So how would you decide we're going to have it here this week?
Wow. Well, there were a few spots that we were in for a long time. This first place that I remember doing anything at was a spot that we called The Hole, basically because it was over on the west side somewhere. And we found these spots because a lot of times they were advertised in the Village Voice, event space for rent. So, we found that like that. I believe we found Freda Dance Studio, which was, a lot of people remember that, 622 Broadway. We did a spot over on, Columns. I believe that's on McDougal Street. But one thing about me, I'm always kind of lost. I know how to get to a place, but you can't tell me. I can't tell you what street it's on. But we did. It was called Columns, a huge space. We did things there. So we just found things word of mouth. People were always advertising. They had a space and it was available for rent. Because you have to remember the real estate situation those days was far different than it is today. So you could find spaces. That was not a problem.
Which leads me to my next question. Barring COVID, could that concept work today? And why or why not?
Yeah. Barring COVID, I believe that concept can work today, but maybe not in Manhattan. Maybe not in Manhattan at all, given the residential nature of Manhattan now. But if you're following the news, the one thing that COVID has wrought is that there's been a retail apocalypse. You have spaces like companies like Lord and Taylor going out of business, Sears gone. There's so many others gone out of business. So what does that mean? In the burbs, there are now these malls with no anchors. The anchors are gone. So that means you have these massive spaces. And because of the combination of both COVID and the internet, that in-store shopping experience may soon disappear in a very large way. So what do you do with these spaces? To me, and I'm giving away my secret sauce, to me, the ideal space is now to start looking outward instead of inward to the cities. Look outward. You don't have to be in Manhattan. You don't have to be in San Francisco. Maybe you go outside the city and you find exactly what it is that you're looking for. I definitely believe that's a possibility. If you see I'm wearing this shirt, Skate Aerobics, I'm big into skating now. I love roller skating and I support these events. But my thought is that you're going to start seeing things like this: roller skating, duck pin bowling, laser tag, whatever, interactive experiences with people happen out in the burbs. I truly believe that we might be coming to that. So COVID may, for all its ills, you have to start planning for that post-COVID life experience. What's that going to look like? Because when there's blood in the streets, there's dollars to be made somewhere. And I'm a mercenary by saying that, but that's reality. You have to think about what opportunity is coming. You can't just wallow in sorrow and loss. You have to say, hey, what are the living going to be doing when living resumes?
Well said. What is House Nation?
House Nation. Number one, rest in peace, Hector Cruz. Hector put that whole situation together, and it was a parallel party that he was doing that we all eventually kind of started rolling together. I hung that shirt behind me. I don't know if you can see it clearly. That's my House Nation bomber jacket. I learned a lot from Hector Cruz, but he was big time into talking about how you have to have a crew of people. Everybody has a role, and we can do these things if we roll together like a fist. So the original House Nation, because I know there's now one in Atlanta, but the original House Nation from Hector, he was able to put together a wide range of people to not only DJ, but to help put on these events. And they were really good, underground type events that also guerrilla type parties moved around quite often. A really good guy to work with, because Hector had he had a savvy sense of business and community in how people should run together. And I listened to him a lot. I listened to Hector an awful lot because Hector, you know, he came up, you know, through, he's seen some shit in his life. And so he would always, you know, counsel me on how I needed to behave. And I took his counsel, even though I can still be, you know, kind of ill. I took his counsel because he always gave good counsel, and he always made sure that the events and the things that he was putting on weren't well. So just another great event and a great time to be in New York if you were into partying.
Well said.
You have to remember this, Wayma. We were at a time when those two events were going on, that it was post Paradise Garage and pre-Shelter. So in that in-between time, you could say, oh, you know, what am I going to do? Or you can go out and just do it. So one of the things about myself is I never gave up my day job. I always like to laugh about that, but I never gave up my day job because, you know, DJing, club promoting, there ain't no 401k, there ain't no dental plan. It's you out there hustling. And so, yeah, hustling is nice, but maybe my commitment wasn't all in on the hustle. I needed to have something solid. And, you know me from our work interactions, or, you know, just know me by my profession, but I have a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree, MBA. And I've always been about, hey, how can I do what I want to do in terms of enjoyment, but also make a dollar at it? Because that, I believe, is very important. And one of the things that I always joked about is that, you know, people talk about, we're going to do this for the love. Well, you know, when we had to pay the landlord, she didn't take love. She didn't even take Valentine's Day cards. She wanted cash. And the first time I ever did an event, I paid off the spot, but I did it in a club in Queens. 2 people showed up. I had to pay out $1,100. I paid out the $1,100. But, you know, it's like, hey, I learned a valuable lesson. You can't do things by yourself. So I did it, and I paid it. The next few times I started to do things, I started bringing people in with me. So I always had a sound system, and I always bought sound equipment. So I had, at one point, I had a pretty big sound system. I had the original Earthquakes. I had 6 of those. And then I had other gear, and I had amps. So, you know, you get with somebody, oh, you know, I got, you know, turntables, and I got this, and you all get it together and go out there and put something together. And even in that, even though I owned the sound system and I owned music, I didn't really care about being the DJ, because there are other guys that I knew that were great DJs. You know, Timmy Richardson is one of them. I was like, hey, you know, Tim, why don't you come play? I got the sound system. Let's do something. So he's been with, we had worked together through Wild Pitch with House Nation. I had actually done an event with others called the Boussoir back in the day that I kind of just financed because I was always working. But we put on events in that period of time that was between the garage and before the Shelter. And we did okay. You can always do what you want to do if you think you could do it.
Well said.
Yeah, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right on both points.
What advice would you give the next generation of party promoters that want to do a current version of what you did back in the day? How would you counsel them?
My counseling for them would be, don't listen to a damn thing I have to say. I don't know anything but the Fred Flintstone, the heebie-jeebie, the hustle, whatever you want to call those dances. So don't listen to me in terms of getting your people out, because I don't know your people. However, I would say do listen to me on one thing. Have some integrity about yourself. Don't screw anybody over, unless, of course, they've screwed you. Then, you know, don't leave any, don't take any prisoners. However, don't screw anybody because you don't have to. There's enough money out here for everybody. So my advice is to be yourself. Don't change for anybody else. Do what it is that you do. I can't tell you about your crowd. I can't tell you about today's music, what's best to be played. I don't know all that stuff. I'm in my 50s now. So, this is a young person's game. What I can say to them, though, is be ethical, be a good person. Don't try to screw people over. And lastly, especially, don't try to screw the women who come to your events. Don't try to screw them over. In fact, don't try to have sex with them at all, because that's always a bad business move, because women talk. So kind of just view all of your people as customers and treat them as such. And I think if you do that, you can have success in music, but in any business.
Well said. Well said. Let's talk about shelter. What is the shelter and what is its cultural significance?
The shelter. Somebody has to confirm this to me, but I remember seeing flyers for the shelter in the last days of the garage, but I'm not sure. I just remember seeing like Fallout shelter flyers. I have no idea why I have that memory, but I do. The cultural significance for me of the shelter is that you had Black promoters and a named Black DJ putting out culturally relevant music for the African diaspora, whereas you weren't getting that anywhere else. And say what you will about Timmy Regisford, but the man has been doing this for decades. He's been committed to the scene. He had put out in two different spaces, well, three, but I only enjoyed the first two, and I only really, really enjoyed the first one, the one downtown. The second one on 33rd, I go sometimes, but I mean, that ceiling was kind of low for me, and I'm 6 foot and change. So those first iterations, though, of the shelter brought a Afrocentric vibe to the scene here in New York that I thought was sorely lacking. And to see brothers running that whole thing was great. To see the kinds of guests that they were bringing out, I thought were culturally relevant, and to know that Timmy and team were playing all kinds of music and introducing people to all kinds of music and breaking music was something that I had not been experiencing for a while. So big room, nice crowd. It was an awesome experience for me. And I believe that he is still culturally relevant to this day. Now, the other side of shelter for me is that they've not been able to maintain over maybe the past couple of years a solid set of events, but that's also because the nature of downtown has changed completely. So spaces are harder to come by. It's much more competitive, I guess. So that, and frankly, the audience is also getting older, which is part of it too, because frankly, I know for myself, I am not getting up at 2 a.m. to go hang out at 3 and till noon. That means I'm sleeping till Tuesday, and I got to deal with other things. So, but for those who enjoy it, I'm glad that it's there, and I'm glad that he's made his mark. And I've always been fairly defensive of their positioning within the scene, because without him, a lot of people would have been nowhere, because, quite frankly, much of this crowd is not wanted in other spaces.
I agree with you 100%. I think a few years ago, I went to a shelter anniversary party at Output, and It was incredible. Timmy was still bringing that fire. The music was once again completely from the African diaspora. Remixes and productions you don't hear anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
The crowd was unapologetically Black, like blackety black. And there was this energy in the room of, we all know why we're here. We know how to dance. We're all gonna respect each other's space. It was magic.
You know something? I was listening to what's his name? Man, I'm not remembering his name. Medea. Who's the guy who plays Medea?
Tyler Perry.
Yeah, Tyler Perry. I was listening then, his old age. I was listening to him this morning. He was on a show, and he said, and I wrote it down. He said, "Don't run from where you come from." And he related to that to his life. And what he was saying is that he's always kept his scene, you know, in a film, you know, environment. He's always kept it about Black people and unapologetically Black. And he compared himself, you know, he compared the some arguments, you know, Zora Neale Hurston versus W.E.B. Du Bois, and maybe himself versus Spike Lee. And he was saying that, you know, sometimes it's best to acknowledge your roots and play to your roots. And what I liked about that is that Timmy is sticking to his roots and he is home. And what I enjoy is that he's still bringing that. And what I don't enjoy is that there are a lot of people, African peoples, who are running all over the place. I was joking with somebody last year, everybody's running to Croatia to go part. I'm like, number one, why the hell am I going to Croatia? For what? You know, I don't, if I go anywhere, I like going, you know, to the Caribbean, you know, and be around my people. You know, you can be around anybody you want to be, but I'm like, why am I running there when I can do what I want with a Timmy, or do what I want with people in the Caribbean, or even people in South America, or even go to Africa? And Timmy brings all of those flavors of the diaspora, and he is doing it here in the States. And as I'm seeing, because I talk to, you know, Little Ray a lot, he's doing now things out in the Caribbean. So I'm going to stick with my people, and I'm going to run with my people, and I'm going to enjoy what they have to bring. Call me Afrocentric. I gotta be Afrocentric, you know, last I checked. So, you know what I mean? So that's, you know, no disrespect to any other scenes, any other peoples, but I just know what we've been doing for so long and what we've been cultivating for so long, and what someone like Timmy and the Shelter and that whole audience has been cultivating. And I'm like, yeah, you know something, I'm gonna roll in that direction. So that's my thoughts around Shelter.
I love that. What is Deep House Page?
Deep House Page. let me tell you something. I actually miss Deep House Page. It was a great forum for exchange of ideas in everything, and from a decidedly Black perspective. And if you don't like it, we don't care. So you could talk from a place of realness to other like-minded individuals. And, you know, it was a great message board. Fish Shake, it, you know, allowing that to expire. But it was a great message board that delivered politics. It delivered socially relevant material. It delivered discussions on finance, discussions on film, discussions on house music, discussions on all music, you know, with people many of whom I'm friends with to this day. Some of them I get to see often, some of them not as often, and some of them I'm still hoping and waiting to meet. I was one of those people who was definitely a prime player on there, because I joke around and discuss everything. But but it's also a place where I think people learn from each other. I'd like to think, I know I learned a lot by being there, even though, you know, I joke around and say things like, you know, house music, the black kind, and where's the white women's at, and, and all sorts of crazy ass things that I would throw out there. But it was also relevant. I always brought it back to how do we as Black people interact with this world through music. And I don't think that we should ever be ashamed to do that. I don't think we should ever be ashamed to bring our perspective. I don't ever think we should be ashamed to be in our natural voice. And I still value those conversations to this day.
Same. What is Winter Music Conference?
Winter Music Conference, is that still going on? Are they still
Yeah,
putting that?
it's still, I mean, I don't know if it's happening during COVID, but it's still alive.
It's still alive. I remember first going to Winter Music Conference, I believe it was 91 or 90, one of those years. I think it was 91. You know, memories now, you know, that's 30 years ago. But it was a while back, it was early 90s. It used to be a great forum to understand the business of music and to understand how to grow this scene as a business and interact with other people. Disappointingly to me, over time, it grew into being, let's go down there and have a party and separate ourselves from the business of music. I wasn't too thrilled with that part of it. I went down, I went to the parties, yeah, but I also liked attending the conference because, you know, it's always a good time for learning. There's a quote that I always joke about. It's from one of those Man with No Name movies, where he says, sometimes around these parts, a man's life may depend on a mere scrap of information. And Winter Music Conference would be one of those places where you could get those scraps and put them in a big book, take them home and make something. So for me, it's not always, you know, for me, when the emphasis became on just the party, I think that's when the whole event spiraled downward. So even if they're still doing it, I mean, what am I going to go there and party? You know, the last couple of times I went, I spent more time hanging out on the beach. I went to a couple of events. And then I went to, some, you know, I think Last Night on Earth out on the bay, you know, checked out Sasha, I think. So it was cool. But it definitely became something else. So now it's, you know, to me, it's just a party. And do I want to go? That's what I usually kind of wrestle with at this point. In fact, to tell you the truth, I have more fun going to the National Black MBA events. To tell you the truth, I get more out of it.
Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot. It's real. I love it. I love it. Let's talk about DJing. How important is a residency in establishing a DJ's career?
You know, I'm not sure anymore. Because people call all sorts of things residencies that I don't even consider to be a residency. You play 2 hours and that's a residency? Is that a joke or are you serious? So, you know, you have guys who are like, yeah, I'm doing a residency. Where's your residency at? Oh, it's at Joe's Coffee Bar after hours. I'm like, okay, so you roll in some speakers and have a party. I can't call that a residency, all right? But there are people who are doing that. You know, they're like, yo, I'm the resident at the Biscuit House on Route 48. I'm like, resident? Come on, dude, stop. You know, stop playing. You know, so and they'll be at the Biscuit House for like 3 hours, and there's like, you know, 5 other DJs. You know, I guess, you know, 2, you know, get an hour. The other get a half hour, and maybe the 5th guy, you know, 6th guy flips biscuits. You know, he may get out with a free biscuit. and nobody's getting paid. So, these residencies are just like purely, they look nice, but are people still getting fooled by this stuff? I think it's more important these days to put together a crew, put together a group of like-minded people who are following you around. I'm excited to see some of the things that the DJs are doing online. I think at this point, that's more important. I'm looking at Francois over at doing his thing with World of Echoes. I'm like, something, it's a pretty good kind of deal you got here, because you have a forum and you're putting out music and you're getting or keeping a following. I think those kind of things are much more important now. The interaction that you're able to derive outside of venues may be more important as a DJ at this point than anything else. And then if you can gain some sort of roving following, once again, maybe that's important. But and like I said, I don't speak for the entire industry, and not even a little sliver of it, but I'm just seeing what I see out there. And, some of these people talk about residencies, and I'm kind of just laughing because, to me, they're not residencies. You play for a couple of hours at a space and that's it. For me, a resident DJ was the guy, he was holding it down from beginning to end, or maybe had an opener, for an hour or so, and then he did the whole night. To me, those are residencies. And those, I just don't see them that much anymore. I mean, what's your experience? Have you been seeing that? Or
no, the Biscuit House analogy is spot on. That's exactly what it is, where it's like 5 guys playing at a coffee shop, calling it, and they're bringing their own system, and then they call it a residency. None of them are getting paid for it, and the crowd isn't really there for them. The crowd is just there just happen to be there anyway.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But it's all marketing, these days. And if you could tell a fairly compelling story, people are listening. But to my mind, it's a bunch of nonsense.
Agreed. In terms of the scene, would you say the scene is more inclusive or less inclusive today?
Wow. Something, I think it's as inclusive as it's ever been. I believe that there's a veil of inclusiveness going on, but it's still highly segregated. People are not as accepting of everyone as they would like for you to believe. I throw that whole nonsense about plur out the window. I look at what people are doing instead of what they're saying. And when I look at what people are doing, I'm not really seeing the inclusiveness on a wide basis, because I still look, and it's not like I can be the final arbiter because I'm not going out a hell of a lot. But I'm looking, and I stay, fairly connected. I'm like, well, these is still the same old divisions that have always been there. You don't really have that large intermingling of audiences that you should. Maybe I'm seeing it with a bad eye, but that's just been my experience. I'm seeing the same kind of divisions that I saw 30 years ago. Hey, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Maybe like to party with likes. But as everything is so labeled, it becomes, oh, I'm going out to hear this kind of music, or I'm going out to hear even a subgenre of this kind of music. I'm like, to me, that's exclusionary. And that's why I don't like the terms of house music. I don't like the terms of EDM. I don't like those terms. I just play music and let everybody get down.
I agree. What the hell happened to New York nightlife?
New York nightlife. What happened? We got old. We got old. A lot of the players got old, but then money started to rule everything. And and I'm just as guilty. But money started to rule everything. You had no longer had those spaces that were available for people to just rent out. You no longer had those spaces that were available where you could drop a nightclub into, because commercial space in New York City is expensive. Lighting is expensive. HVAC is expensive. Insurance is expensive. Electricity is expensive. All of these costs they become quite prohibitive. So what rises? The kind of events or spaces that can afford to pay the bills. I once shared an article from Harvard Business School on DHP. It was an analysis, a business case based on one of those Noel Tepperberg spots, one of those big spots on the west side.
Marquee.
Yes, that's the business right now. These monster spaces that can afford to pay for the real estate. And that's what it's become. It's become a game. And that's why I said earlier, this game can no longer be played in the cities, or at least not in New York City. It's just too expensive. It's too expensive for the small players. It's too expensive for the visionaries who may not have big dollars, but have great ideas. It just becomes too expensive. So where are you going to do this stuff at? You probably are better off doing it outside of cities. So from what I'm seeing or what I've experienced, and I have a cousin who's still very involved in the business, it's become more of a dollar thing. And when it becomes just purely a dollar play, and hey, I like dollars and I like dollar plays, but when it's just a dollar play, you're going to lose a lot. And so I think a lot of that energy has been driven out of the New York nightlife scene. But things are cyclical. They'll probably come back.
Last question. What's next?
What's next? Something? I like playing golf. What I enjoy right now is roller skating. I believe that there's a huge resurgence of roller skating. I believe there's a lot of energy in roller skating. And I believe that the music, that scene that has always existed right next to the dance music culture, that scene is still vibrant. They are still actually doing events. They're not big events, but they're doing events. I rolled with these people all summer, helped them do their events. And for the entire summer, we ran responsible, socially distant events outdoors in the parks all summer long. And we're getting skaters coming in from Connecticut, New Jersey, out on Long Island. So what I'm seeing is that there is a renewed energy in that scene. And I'll never be a player in that scene. So, I won't be running things because I skate, but I'm not a skater. I'm not master of skater. I wish I was, but I'm not a master skater. However, they are putting on some great events. And as I do more and more research, they've always done great events. And I believe that they are building a scene. They are building some momentum in that scene that is going to carry over very nicely once this COVID once we've gotten past it. But we have to get past COVID. And if I could end with just saying something, one of the things that I truly believe is that the music scene, the people in the scene are going to have to be more supportive of seeing that we get past COVID by, distancing, wearing our mask, but also getting vaccinated. I'm not going to tell anybody to get vaccinated, but I'm going to say this. Until it is safe to party indoors en masse, people are not going to be partying indoors en masse. It's not going to happen. That's the height of ridiculousness. So unless we decide, and I see a lot of people in this part of town, in this industry, who have passed, and somebody mentioned me, they like, why are the big people dying? And they were, we didn't have no idea why. But in this scene, in the dance music scene here in New York, we had people dying, a lot of them. Unless we start to get this situation in hand, nightlife is not going to return. And in looking at a couple of analysts, I think I saw something in Billboard. I read, obviously I read a lot. I saw something in Billboard where they were talking, an analyst was talking about this nightlife industry is not going to return until it is safe to get people to party together. So that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see us take it much more seriously. I'd like to see people take their health more seriously. And then I'd like to see the scene go through another revolution because, things are always evolving.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Good to catch up after a minute. And yeah, we'll be in touch. I'll let you know when it goes live.
Yeah, thank you so much, my man. It's good to see you.
Likewise, good to see you as well. Have a great weekend.
You too. Be well.
For you too.
Bye now. Peace.
Peace.